Okay, so tonight we're going to look at Krishnamurti, and I'm going to start by reading a paragraph from the book On God, which I highly recommend. And then we're going to look at a few paragraphs from Choiceless Awareness, another book I highly recommend. So here's Krishnamurti. When the mind is still, reality, the indescribable, comes into being. You cannot invite it. To invite it, you must know it, and what is known is not the real. So the mind must be simple, unburdened by belief, by ideation. And when there is stillness, when there is no desire, no longing, when the mind is absolutely quiet, with a stillness that is not induced, then reality comes. And that truth, that reality, is the only transforming agent. It is the only factor that brings a fundamental, radical revolution in existence in our daily life. And to find that reality is not to seek it, but to understand the factors that agitate the mind, that disturb the mind itself. Then the mind is simple, quiet, still. In that stillness, the unknown, the unknowable comes into being. And when that happens, there is a blessing. So, what is it that agitates the mind, that disturbs the mind? Because he's pointing us to finding out about that first. So now we're going to look in choiceless awareness. And here is Krishnamurti. He's going to answer that. Being aware does not mean learning and accumulating lessons from life. On the contrary, to be aware is to be without the scars of accumulated experience. After all, when the mind merely gathers experience according to its own wishes, it remains very shallow and superficial. A mind which is deeply observant does not get caught up in self-centered activities. And the mind is not observant if there is any action of condemnation or comparison. Comparison and condemnation do not bring understanding. Rather, they block understanding. To be aware is to observe, just to observe, without any self-identifying process. Such a mind is free of that hard core which is formed by self-centered activities. I think it is very important to experience this state of awareness for oneself, and not merely to know about it through any description which another may give. Awareness comes into being naturally, easily, spontaneously, when we understand the center, the me, which is everlastingly seeking experience and sensation. A mind which seeks sensation through experience becomes insensitive, incapable of swift movement, and therefore it is never free. But in understanding its own self-centered activities, the mind comes upon this state of awareness which is choiceless. And such a mind is then capable of complete silence and stillness. When we are aware of ourselves, is not the whole movement of living a way of uncovering the me, the ego, the self? The self is a very complex process which can be uncovered only in relationship, in our daily activities, in the way we talk, the way we judge, the way we calculate, the way we condemn others and ourselves. All that reveals the conditioned state of our own thinking. And is it not important to be aware of this whole process? It is only through awareness of what is true from moment to moment that there is discovery of the timeless, the eternal. Without self-knowledge, the eternal cannot be. When we do not know ourselves, the eternal becomes a mere word, a symbol, a speculation, a dogma, a belief, an illusion to which the mind can escape. But if one begins to understand the me in all its various activities from day to day, then in that very understanding without any effort, the nameless, the timeless comes into being. But the timeless is not a reward for self-knowledge. That which is eternal cannot be sought after. The mind cannot acquire it. It comes into being when the mind is quiet. And the mind can be quiet only when it is simple, when it is no longer storing up, condemning, judging, weighing. It is only the simple mind that can understand the real, not the mind that is full of words, full of knowledge and information. The mind that analyzes and calculates is not a simple mind. So, can I be aware of my greed, of my envy from moment to moment? These feelings are expressions of the me, of the self, are they not? The self, and this is the self with a small s, the self is still the self at any level you may place it. Whether it is the higher self or the lower self, it is still within the field of thought. And can I be aware of these things as they arise from moment to moment? Can I discover for myself the activities of my ego when I am eating, talking, when I am playing, when I am listening, when I'm with a group of people? Can I be aware of the accumulated resentments, of the desire to impress, to be somebody? Can I discover that I am greedy and be aware of my condemnation of greed? The very word greed is a condemnation, is it not? To be aware of greed is also to be aware of the desire to be free from it. and to see why wants to be free from it, the whole process. This is not a very complicated procedure. One can immediately grasp the whole significance of it. So one begins to understand from moment to moment this constant growth of the me with its self-importance, its self-projected activities, which is basically, fundamentally, the cause of fear. But you cannot take action to get rid of the cause. All you can do is to be aware of it. The moment you want to be free from the ego, that very desire is also part of the ego. So you have a constant battle in the ego over two desirable things, between the part that wants and the part that does not. As one becomes aware at the conscious level, one also begins to discover the envy, the struggles, the desires, the motives, the anxieties that lie at the deeper levels of consciousness. When the mind is intent on discovering the whole process of itself, then every incident, every reaction becomes a means of discovery, of knowing oneself. And that requires patient watchfulness, which is not the watchfulness of a mind that is constantly struggling, that is learning how to be watchful. Then you will see that the sleeping hours are as important as the waking hours, because life then is a total process. As long as you do not know yourself, fear will continue, and all the illusions that the self creates will flourish. Self-knowledge, then, is not a process to be read about or speculated on. It must be discovered by each one from moment to moment, so that the mind becomes extraordinarily alert. In that alertness, there is a certain quiescence, a passive awareness, in which there is no desire to be or not to be, and in which there is an astonishing sense of freedom. It may be only for a minute, for a second, and that's enough. That freedom is not of memory. It is a living thing. But the mind, having tasted it, reduces it to a memory and then wants more of it. To be aware of this total process is possible only through self-knowledge. And self-knowledge comes into being from moment to moment as we watch our speech, our gestures, the way we talk, and the hidden motives that are suddenly revealed. Then only is it possible to be free from fear. As long as there is fear, there is no love. Fear darkens our being, and that fear cannot be washed away by any prayer, by any ideal or activity. The cause of fear is the me, which is so complex in its desires, its wants, its pursuits. The mind has to understand that whole process. And the understanding of it comes only when there is watchfulness without choice. So,
The phrase, the hidden motive, hidden motives. He uses that phrase, and that strikes a chord for me,
mhm.
in the sense that
Yeah, fine. Fine.
Go ahead.
in the sense that in meditation, which is as close as I can get to what he calls is a quiet mind, and I'm sure his experience of a quiet mind is much different from mine, but as quiet as possible. In moments of watchfulness, I can see motive that fuels a thought, and it moves like lightning,
Mhm.
and it isn't so much that I'm so much in the moment that I can see it at the moment, but beyond the moment, in reflecting, it seems to be apparent, and the motive is almost always associated with what I take to be the negative aspects and inclinations of my ego. And I'm not condemning ego wholesale at all, but there seems to be a consistency there for me in my sometimes ability to see the motive that is propelling the thought. And this idea of choiceless awareness is that what's choiceless for me is the rush to judge, that motive
Yeah.
Ah,
in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say that I see that in its totality, but I see a little bit of, it's like when a shadow crosses on the wall, and it's peripheral until you look at the wall, and then it's gone.
mhm.
But it's a fascinating process, and left to my own devices, I would think I'm a very bad person.
Mhm.
But I'm grateful that I'm not left to my own devices.
Right. Right.
That's all I can think of right now.
Good. Good. Yeah, that's the beauty of the choiceless part, the not judging oneself.
Right.
Very important. Because as soon as you start judging, you're back in the old loop.
And if you make an overt effort not to judge, you're back in the same game again.
That's right.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, that's right.
What was the where he mentioned the hidden motives?
Well, he says, to be aware of this total process is possible only through self-knowledge. And self-knowledge comes into being from moment to moment as we watch our speech, our gestures, the way we talk, and the hidden motives that are suddenly revealed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to watch means with choiceless
Yeah,
awareness, because that's the only true watching. Otherwise, it's the me that's watching.
Right.
Yes.
It's the me that's making the choice.
Yes. Yes. And the choice is usually a judgment or a condemnation or a comparison or a measure of itself.
Yeah, the sensor is working. I can see that. I mean, I can, there are times when I can really see it operating. I'll go by and something happens and I condemn it. I judge it. And, you know, in a certain, maybe couple of seconds, sometimes a minute or so, I'll catch myself saying, there you go again. You know, the me is alive and active and in its full glory, that son of a bitch. You know, I mean, there again, you know, I condemn it again. And
That's right.
so I guess what you know, it's so reassuring when you read stuff, when you read this guy and you, especially this choiceless awareness, where, you know, you see that you can do something and it's up to me to do it. You're not going to do it for me. You're not going to do it for me. The book is not going to do it. He put some pointers, but I got to do it, and I can. And the thing that's so reassuring is that, you know, just to try to be aware moment to moment. And, you know, you get all this complexity, all the writings and all the YouTubes and all the books on this stuff. And it basically works down to moment to moment, be aware. I think that's very powerful for me. And it's very encouraging, you know. Hey, I can't do it all the time, but I can do it some of the time.
Correct.
That's very, very, anyhow, it's my bonbon.
Yeah. Well, yes. And the more there is a moment-to-moment awareness and watchfulness, it seems to expand. And one finds oneself in that moment-to-moment awareness more often than not, especially during difficult times, especially when that me is being self-protective or is projecting into the future with a lot of what ifs and creating fear. Especially having to do around fear. When that feeling arises, and if we're able to stay with it without naming it as fear, there is this process of choiceless awareness of that feeling. And we haven't named it, but somehow it's like a pin is put into it and it starts to dissipate. But that can only happen when there is choiceless awareness of that particular feeling. So there's no analyzing of it. There's not even trying to find the cause of it. It's just the immediate seeing of it, which is an immediate insight into it.
By naming it Evie, are you falling back into duality again when you name it as fear?
Correct. Correct. because the naming is based on knowledge and memory. And remember what he says here. The movement of thought, it's a living thing. So it's new each moment. It's alive. And so choiceless awareness in that moment, there's no longer an observer and the observed. There's one movement. And being able to stay with it, to see it without any effort, without forcing anything, is the beauty of it. You know, he's saying here, the me is fear. Fear and the me is one. And he said in that paragraph in the book on God, he said very clearly, what we have to do is find that which disturbs the mind so that the mind can become quiet naturally. He said it's not an induced quietness. It's a natural quietness once you remove that which disturbs the mind. And what is it that disturbs the mind? The me. I mean, isn't that true?
Fear and desire.
Which is me.
Yes.
Fear and desire are the two main factors that disturb the mind.
Right.
And so now we know that. So can we see it as it arises in the moment? And he says, which he says all the time, you can see it best in relationship. In relationship to another person, in relationship to your work, in relationship to ideas, in relationship to your beliefs. In relationship is where this living thing comes alive in the moment. Awareness, choiceless awareness.
So it's the moment by moment choiceless awareness of each thought having to do with fear or desire.
Yeah, and in its many different ways, you know, it shows up in different ways,
That's
even
what-
some subtle ways.
That's why, well, it's so subtle. That's why it requires an attentive watching. And so that's the challenge. How much of my day can I spend in an attentive, choiceless watching? And how much of my day is spent in a mindless following my thoughts around?
You mean getting into the thoughts and dwelling
yeah,
on them,
Yeah.
and then
You could put it this
becoming
way.
them.
How much of my day is spent being awake and how much of my day is spent being asleep?
right, right.
Because let's face it, it takes a conscious intention to want to be attentive to my thoughts.
Yeah,
Right. If I wake up in the morning and don't affirm a conscious intention to be wakeful today, to be watchful today, to not have my mind pull me around like a strong dog on a leash. If I don't have a conscious intention, I'm likely going to spend the day as a servant to the meanderings of my mind. And I will be at the effect of the meanderings of my mind. I'll be roiled by the emotions that my desirous thoughts stir or my anxious thoughts stir.
Right.
So Paul, do you have certain cues that remind you to be aware of the presence, like follow your breath, or the ring of a phone, or something that sort of, oh yeah, pulls you back into the present moment? Is there something that you yourself do that keeps you aware, choicelessly aware?
I just try to watch each thought as it comes up. I try to be attentive to each time a thought bubbles up, each time a thought moves, each time my mind moves.
Because then you know that you're not in the present.
Right.
When you're fully in the present, there's nothing to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You just be.
Right.
But then as these thoughts start moving, I mean, we're not talking about functional thought.
Well, it's like Sailor Bob said, what's wrong with right now unless you start thinking about it?
Right.
Well, that can be a cue when the thought arises. The thought always comes from the past, and that's part of your ego structure there. So
Right.
a thought, I mean, especially when a thought starts to get me feeling bad or aggravated or so on and so forth. And I notice that I really take notice on this thing that the feelings in the moment are directly related to how much attention I pay to the thoughts. I mean, I don't get the feelings until I get the thought. And,
Right.
it really impresses me with, I've had a couple of bad experiences with a couple of people, so on and so forth. And if I can let go of that experience, I don't have the discomfort. But I want to bring it up, and then I want to solve it, and I want to get back, or I want to come up with a better argument, or I want to sit there. I'm caught in the thought. Now I'm feeding it attention, and that's my ego at work, trying to, I don't know, trying to maybe make up for an insult or something like that, and it's just pure baloney.
There's one other paragraph I would like to read. I think it's important here. The question is, can there be thinking without memory? And Krishnamurti says, in other words, is there thought without the word? It's very interesting if you go into it. Is the speaker using thought? Thought as the word is necessary for communication, is it not? The speaker has to use words, English words, to communicate with you who understand English. And the words come out of memory, obviously. But what is the source? What is behind the word? Let me put it differently. There is a drum. It gives out a tone. When the skin is tightly stretched at the right tension, you strike it, and it gives out the right tone, which you may recognize. The drum, which is empty, in right tension is your own mind, is what your own mind can be. When there is right attention and you ask the right question, then it gives the right answer. The answer may be in terms of the word, the recognizable, but that which comes out of that emptiness is surely creation. The thing that is created out of knowledge is mechanical, but the thing which comes out of emptiness, out of the unknown, that is the state of creation. So here he's clearly differentiating. He's showing that, yes, we need when we speak, we're using memory, right?
Of course.
But what is the source of that? What is the source of what the message is that we're trying to communicate? If the source of the message is coming from memory, from knowledge, well, then he's saying that's mechanical. But if it's coming from a mind that is empty, that is quiet, that is still, then that's what's new and that's what's creation. So we have to use words and memory to communicate. And of course, we need that knowledge if we're going to learn how to use a computer or drive a car or do math or whatever, of course. But psychologically, if we want to create from the unknown, from something that's totally new, then that can only come from a mind that is still. And that means it's ego-free. Because ego is memory. It's the accumulated memory and images and experiences that we've had. And that's what forms this me. So true creation, he says, is coming from a place where the me is not.
I have a question. I have a question that also leads to a modification of what I said earlier. Because one might say, who is it that practices choiceless awareness? When I said that one starts the day with a conscious intention to be choicelessly aware, one could also say, well, who is it that has the conscious intention? And is not that a reification of the me also? So it's not that kind of me-centered, goal-directed conscious intention. And this is hard to put into words. It's almost like you first have to make a conscious intention when you learn a new skill, whether it's driving a car or brushing one's hair or anything that's, let's say, a skill that you have to practice. But then after a while, it becomes automatic. It becomes unself-conscious. It becomes a natural expression. So the choiceless awareness is not the end of a direct goal. It's like something that you do easily and naturally. It becomes easy and natural to do the more one does it. It's an awkward way to say it, but I'm struggling with how to express it. Because I don't want to reinforce the notion of a me consciously striving to be unself-consciously aware,
Right.
right? And that's easy to articulate. The other side of it is less, lends itself less elegantly to words. It's a choiceless awareness that somehow blooms the more you become immersed in hearing about it, is all I can say. You have any thoughts about that?
Well, it's you know, in a way, it's even though it's a form of a desire, it's not really a desire that says I'm attached to what the outcome is, but it's a desire that says I don't want to have this psychological suffering. I want to be free of psychological suffering. I do want to be free of fear, psychological. And so it's a wanting, but it's not the kind of wanting that says, I'm looking for that result that's going to give me a transcendent vision. No, it's a wanting that says, no more psychological suffering. The time has come for peace. And then, because of this guide that says, well, if that's what you want, well, then start becoming aware of when you're not peaceful. Start becoming aware of when there is psychological suffering, but become aware of it choicelessly, without any condemnation of any kind at all.
And maybe we can't shy away from calling it a desire, because perhaps it's the one desire amongst all desires that at least can have a true, genuine benefit.
I like the word aim.
Aim, yeah.
Aim, yes.
I like that. I didn't invent it. I heard it somewhere in this context.
Uh-huh.
If it's at all possible, when I'm speaking to someone else, if I don't have an aim to manage how that person perceives me, then I am free of fear. Because the fear is propelling the aim to control how that person perceives me. And so if I can somehow surrender the imagined
Oh, we lost
We
you.
lost you.
We can't hear you.
We lost you.
Oh, well, it
Maybe.
probably wasn't very important.
You're back.
Now you're back. Now you're back.
It's okay. I don't know where I tuned out, so I'm not going to repeat all that. But I like the observation that there is freedom
Yes.
as an immediate benefit to being free of any aim related to trying to control how someone perceives me, whether I want to be perceived as intelligent or courageous or noble or honorable or any of that nonsense. If that dynamic simply does not exist,
Right,
then I am free to say what I want and what I feel.
right. That's
And just, you know, however that lands on someone else is cool.
Mhm.
right.
So Evie and Paul, what role does effort play in all this? You know, with it's sort of a contradiction. If you use effort, then who's doing the efforting? You know, it's almost implying that you're reifying the self, as Paul had said. But yet, something has to happen. You have to do something.
Yes.
Whether, you know, trying sort of pushes the goal, if you have one, further away. But still, you need to do something.
Mhm.
Correct?
Well,
Doing something is sabotaging.
no, but what you're doing is you're being choicelessly aware. That's the doing. And that's the seeing is the doing.
Yeah, you have to notice.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Wheeler was saying last week, this is not anything new. We're only talking about something that you have taken for granted and have failed to notice. Just start noticing.
Yes. And why does that have to entail effort?
Well, yeah, and Wheeler had some confusions, you know, some mild confusions about non-duality, and he had all that sorted out after a plane trip to see Sailor Bob. So
Right.
there was effort. He made effort to get from America to Australia
Yes,
to
yeah,
clarify his confusion. So there is room for effort.
yes.
Ah, okay. But yeah, I guess it's how we're using the word effort. It doesn't take effort to be choicelessly aware. If you want to say it takes some kind of a desire for freedom, maybe that. But it doesn't take effort. Or if you're saying, well, it took effort, maybe it didn't take effort to fly from California to Australia. Maybe there was no effort. There was a calling and an answering to that call. You know, it's and then I wanted to say, you know, the first time we read anything by Krishnamurti was in 1975. And I think it was we just picked it up. Actually, my son handed it to me because he had read it. He was just a kid, but he picked it up and read it and handed it to me. And we read it. And within a week, we were on a plane to Ojai to hear Krishnamurti. There was no effort. In fact, the whole thing was effortless and easy. Everything unfolded the way it needed to unfold. There was no effort.
It was choiceless.
It
There was
was
no choice. You didn't frame it in a frame. You didn't frame it in the form of a choice. There was none.
that's
And you
right.
do that all the time. Sometimes you go shopping and you buy something, you just pick it out. You don't think about it. It's just there. There are a lot of things that you do during There are things that you do during the day that there's no thinking involved.
But hold on.
Yeah.
One of the most important choices we make moment by moment is where will I direct my attention? Your attention is one of the most coveted
Yes.
commodities today.
Yes.
Everybody wants your attention,
Yes.
right? And where I direct my attention is really one of the most important choices I make moment by moment. And if I'm going to be consciously, choicelessly aware, that's a directing of my attention. So in that sense, that's the only effort that it requires. It's looking this way instead of looking that way. It's looking inward as opposed to looking outward.
But I don't see effort in that. I don't see effort in that. It's like a call. It says it isn't. It's just there. It just happens.
Okay. The
There's
effort,
no effort. It's not saying I must now be attentive. That's not the way it is. It just happens.
I think what I hear is,
an intention to have it happen.
I think what you're saying is that in my moments of being very ordinary, I've got it backwards. My attention, wherever my attention goes, that's where my energy goes.
Yes.
And if I'm sitting here now worried about some place I have to go tomorrow, and I'm projecting myself into the situation, and it's causing me anxiety, that anxiety is the burning up of the energy I need in order to be here now.
Correct. Correct.
So it isn't a matter, the word effort can be applied to something like washing the dishes,
Physical effort.
but to suggest being without effort means that I have given up this illusion that I have the power to do anything that is really beneficial to me. I need to surrender that and just be. And that's a trick of the universe. I don't know if I've ever been. I know I'm sitting here right now, and I'm totally focused on what we're looking at. And so that keeps the energy right here and now. But the minute this session comes to an end, I'll find something about tomorrow to worry at. Guaranteed.
And then you'll be choicelessly aware of the movement of that thought.
Hopefully. That's an aim.
Well, maybe we can all think about this a little more.
Oh,
Excuse me,
bless.
excuse me.
Bless,
Oh,
bless.
sorry. Well, have a good week, everyone, and we'll talk again next week. Looking forward to it.
Have a good week and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
What I
Thank
said,
you.
hi.
Thank you.
Ciao.
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 Ciao.